right. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. All right. All right. We're here with Coach Matt Triplet. And this is kind of our third part of our big table talks brought to you by the Columbus Foundation and Ohio FCA. So we're talking about Central Ohio FCA, and we're talking about a lot of the stuff that we have been talking about all day: community engagement, wellness, youth, mental health, all these different ways that we can be healthy and get out there and support so many things in our community. So I thought, what better way than to talk to Coach Triplet here, because you've done two or three things in the world of coaching and sports with
Mhm.
youth. And so, and also, of course, we're bringing in faith into the conversation. So I think this is it's going to be an awesome way to really talk about some really important topics. So first and foremost, can you give us just a little bit of background about who you are, what you do? You know, you can throw out a few accolades if you'd like.
Sure, sure. So I'm Matt Triplet. I'm the head boys lacrosse coach over at St. Francis de Sales here in Columbus, and I'm a local product. Graduated from Dublin Kaufman High School. Played lacrosse there. Then went on, played at Ohio State University. Then started my coaching career back at Dublin Kaufman, and then took over at DeSales a while ago. Have a few state championships that have been we've
Wait a
been
minute.
fortunate enough to win. And most recently, I was able to help get past a mental health bill for coaches, where basically it requires mental health training as a part of their coaching curriculum, in addition to like CPR and first aid and things like that. As well as by day, I work in commercial banking.
So just a couple of things, couple of things. So and a newly converted Catholic, is that true?
Correct,
Fairly
correct. Newly
new?
converted Catholic. Yes,
Yeah.
my kids all go to St. Paul's up in Westerville, and I found it was calling. It was one of those things where I didn't really seem to fit in some a lot of the churches that I'd been brought up in. But being a coach at a Catholic school for 20 plus years, it really wraps you in and it makes you feel at home. And so took the leap to go in through RCIA a while ago and timed it up just perfectly. So my daughter and I were able to take first communion at the same time. So
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, how
yeah,
nice is that? That's
yeah.
so cute. That is so cute. So we'll dial it back for a second and start with just kind of the high school scene, right? So
Hmm.
we've talked already today. We talked middle school athletes. We've talked college kind of recruiting. You're sitting in there now at the high school, at really the varsity level. And so, what are you seeing right now in top challenges for student athletes?
I think the overall recruiting is a huge thing. I think burnout is a huge thing where a lot of kids are being asked to specialize, not just by club coaches, but by school coaches. They're doing the same sports year round, and I think a lot of the top challenges is the same as that adults feel in terms of the grass is always greener on the other side. So when you're looking at a lot of things in terms of social media, so and so up the street is getting recruited, or so and so is getting this many
Mm,
offers. You see a lot of that, and you compare yourself to those people. And it's not like reading a story in the newspaper where it's 24/7, where they're constantly bombarded by that. And I think it's just the fact that the world can get to the kids, and the kids can access the world 24 hours a day,
mm.
365 days a year.
Yeah, that's truly a lot. So, so what I guess in that case, let's kind of dovetail it in with the mental health bill. So first,
Hmm.
why don't you tell us kind of what the mental health bill is, and then why you thought it was so important to get passed?
Sure. So the mental health bill, it is a requirement for coaches' curriculum where they have to take an approved course by the Ohio Department of Mental Health. And so I think there's like 11 or so courses that are on there. And basically, it has to cover topics such as eating disorders, anxiety, suicide, depression, and once the coaches take that course, then they're able to be certified by the state to be able to coach. So anybody and it's not just coaches, anybody who is required to have a pupil activity permit in the state of Ohio is required to have one of these courses. Um, I felt it was very important to have passed because in the state of Ohio, they're the only people that can mandate coaches take something is through the state legislature. The OHSAA can't mandate anything. And so what I had noticed back in the the COVID days during lockdowns and whatnot was that there was always a pattern where someone would put out a tweet or something on social media that someone had died by suicide, and then I would always watch the people that were close to them, and what would happen was it was always the same pattern where it was someone would pass death by suicide. Then staff, administration, or people around them would say, hey, you know what, we're trained in the event that this were to happen again. So it was always the same cycle where they were always getting trained after the fact. And
Mm,
so really what I wanted to do was try to find a way to get ahead of it, and so by being able to get in there, getting that law passed, now we're getting ahead of it. So it might not be a top of mind topic for a lot of coaches, because the topic of depression and suicide and mental health, it really doesn't become a passion or a big thing in your life until you are affected by it personally. And
mm,
so the people who are affected by it personally, it's a huge deal and it's a huge passion. Well, unfortunately, it's not like CPR or first aid where you're like, yeah, that makes sense. I need, to have this. So, so being able to be cognizant of what you need to do with the mental health training, if someone comes to you with it, with any problems, that's the most paramount thing. And it doesn't teach coaches how to be therapists or how to diagnose anybody. It's like if a kid gets hurt on the field, do I call the trainer? Do I call the squad? Do I call mom down out of the stands? It's the same
mm,
thing where it's, do I call parents? Do I call a counselor at school? Or do I call 911?
mhm. So it's the heightened awareness, right? So you just have that
Mm-hmm.
as top of mind. So talk to us about, so we have a lot of people on here. They might have younger kids, they haven't gotten to high school yet. They, especially for them. So what happens in high school with the difference between the athlete and the coach? Because I think something is different, of course, as you get older into those years, as you start bridging 10th grade into 11th and 12th, upper class kind of scenario. I think the coach takes on different roles. So what have you seen in your experience about that relationship and why it's so critical that you know about the mental health stuff?
Right, absolutely. I think that the role of the coach as they get older, and and you experience this as a mother, where as the boys get into high school and they become more independent, a lot of times coaches will see those kids more than they will see their own. Like I see my high school boys in season more than I do my own children, and that's the
Mhm.
same thing with a lot of parents, where the kids are at practice with me or at lifting or at a lot of different things more than they are around their parents. So I think that it's very key, just because coaches can be in tune with any kind of changes, but also it's also a partnership with the parents. So if the parents are like, hey, you know what, I've noticed something about my son Johnny, or whatever it might be, they're going to be able to go ahead and notice that. And I think that as the kids get older, um, one of the things that I've noticed is the progression from freshman to sophomore and sophomore to junior. That leap from sophomore to junior is absolutely huge, because it seems like the student is starting to understand that there's a finality to their grade school and high school experience, and they're getting ready to go in the real world. So I think that
Mm,
a lot of the pressures that happens to them is, you're prepping for the SATs, you're prepping for the ACTs, you're prepping for all these different tests, and it's like, oh my gosh, that real life's about to happen. It's no longer for funsies. And and especially with athletes, they're getting recruited. They're making college choices as to where they're going to go and spend the next 4 years potentially. And I think that coaches then also become much more of a guide, because they've been through a lot of these processes before. Whereas virtually every parent, it's brand new for them, and they don't know what to do.
so I have a couple of things I want to ask on that one, but I'll go to this one first. Um, so I think I know what I've observed oftentimes is that I see to that point, the parents get there and now the kid has decided they want to go play beyond. They don't want to finish, or now they've gotten serious, they fall in love with the sport, they really want to do it. But they don't have that back history of like middle school all the way up, right? They're missing some of that. And so that sometimes I've had parents come to me very frustrated, like no one told them, right? Like they didn't get the memo that they should have been actually, to have a college career in the sport. It's not like you start in ninth and 10th grade, right? You're actually starting
Hmm.
earlier than that. So
Absolutely.
what's your take then about actually talking maybe to the middle school kids about what does that trajectory look like?
The trajectory of that, what it really looks like is, if you want to play at a high level, collegiate or college, I think that really starting 7th and 8th grade. That's where it starts. It doesn't start between sophomore junior year. That's usually when you're getting recruited and you're supposed to be, peaking essentially. So really just getting into as much practice as you can. Think of it as is your skill there? No, maybe not. But is your effort there? The skill and effort, those two have to really intersect with each other. I think with a lot of the parents that they don't understand that when you're moving from 7th and 8th grade, I see a lot of kids come to our open house. They're like, "Hey, I run both track and do lacrosse in the spring," and their jaws almost hit the ground when I say, "Well, you're gonna have to pick one," and
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
and
yeah,
so I think a lot of it's a lot of that, but I think a lot of it is also the understanding that at 7th and 8th grade that they're preparing for adulthood and for college earlier and earlier, around the country. It's not just your kids experience or their kids experience. I mean, back in the day, I remember I had a graduate in 2018, Jack DeSantis. He played at Maryland and Ohio State. He committed in between his 8th grade and freshman years of high school. Those when the rules were completely
yep,
different.
yep.
But coaches have kids on their radar at that age, and so I think that deciding if a sport is for you is the first thing, and then understand that as you get older, once you get into college, it's fun, but it's a job and it's a grind and it's tough, and not a lot of people can handle that lifestyle. But I also think that a lot of people have the vision of D1 or bust in their heads versus, there's Division two, there's Division three, there's JUCO, there's a lot of other options that are out there. So, high level D1 is your, 7th and 8th grade you're kind of looking at. But if they discover the sport later on, you're going to have to, just, understand that you're not probably going to play at like a Richmond or an Ohio State or a Johns Hopkins or something. You might play lacrosse at a smaller like Wilmington College or something like that.
But that one, that's one of my, that's like such a bugaboo, and because it's I've seen so many players that are so good, and they're like, if they didn't go to the whatever top 20, they're not going to play at all, and it just breaks my heart because there's so many reasons to play, and there's so many places to play. But I do think that a lot of parents are like, well, either they don't know or they don't, I don't know, they don't respect it, etc. But again, hopefully, I always like to put the student before the athlete. Hopefully, you're going to college, right? Not just to play the sport, right? You didn't just go to high school just to play the sport, right? Hopefully, you have the other piece of it too, which means things can go a lot of different ways. But do you think are we doing a better job in educating people about all of the different ways that you can stay with it? Because I think if you want to play lacrosse, there's a place you could play. You might not just get all your choices, but you can find a place to play. There are that many programs, especially for the girls.
Oh
There's
yeah.
so many women's programs now. It's incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like you hit the nail right on the head. I think a lot of people look for a lacrosse school first, and then academics second. And I think a lot of people they get burnt out where they say, "Hey, I don't have a lot of options out there." Well, it's, when I talk to somebody, I say, "Well, what do you want to go to school for?" It's like, "Well, I want to go for engineering," and he's looking at nothing but liberal arts colleges. And it's like, no, let's tailor your search to
Yeah.
everything to see but I agree with you 100%. It's just depending on, a lot of times it's ego. Where do you want to play? There's a home for people at the next level. It doesn't matter, but it's, finding the right home.
So okay, so in that, now we're talking like because it's true. I didn't even think about you're seeing kids come into like the open house at eighth grade, and they're like babies, right? So I work with a lot of middle schoolers right now, and I doing a lot of prep work, and I always ask them. I ask the eighth grades because they got the swagger at that point, right? Eighth grade, you're like top of the thing, and I go, do you remember how you felt when you were sixth graders and you walked and you saw the eighth graders? Like everybody remembers. I go, so when you go from eighth grade to ninth grade and you see these basically men who are
They're men,
seniors,
yeah.
right? They're like 18, 19 years old. You're going to even be more so. So, it's that transition and that constant knockdown of humility, et cetera. It's overwhelming. So it's a pressure cooker, right? And it's still
Hmm.
4 years is not very long. Seems long at the time, but in fact, not long. So how 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 do you handle that or what from the mental health standpoint, et cetera, as a coach? That's a lot of kids to work through. I mean, that's a really big range. So, what tips do you have there for being able to coach that and kind of give them what they need at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a big part of it is one, managing relationships, but two, meeting them where they are. just because two kids are seniors doesn't mean that from a maturity standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, that they're on the exact same level. So I think, being able to foster a relationship with them when they're younger as a freshman, and then understanding and seeing their growth as a coach as they get older, and then also changing with the times, because I know so many coaches and people out there where they'll treat a senior the same way they, or use the same nicknames and things like that with a senior than they did when they, joking around with them as they did when they were freshmen. Well, no, he was a fresh, he's 14 years old back then. He's a 19-year-old
Mhm.
man now.
Yeah,
No,
right.
so I think it's just managing those relationships, but I think it's keeping an open dialogue with parents, and encouraging that dialogue with the parents as well from a mental health standpoint. Just if something's going on with the player, and the coach might not know about it, it's a two-way street. So if the player comes home from practice and he's swearing up and down and throwing stuff, and the parents see that, but the coaches don't see that, like, well, Johnny left, he's been quiet, he's been fine, until you told me. I had no clue that this was going on.
Mm,
So I think having that dialogue and building that trust between the parents and the coaches when they're younger, and when everything's seemingly happy-go-lucky and they're still young pups, and as they get older, as more complex issues and more complex things come up in each other's lives, I think that relationship and that trust is built and strong enough as a foundation where you're going to be able to have, like, serious conversations.
yeah. Well, so that's the next thing I want to pop into, because about the importance of high school coaches, I think, especially in the upper class kind of grades, because I think for parents, and I think this is what this kind of to the younger parents, when you have your seventh and eighth grader, you almost can't conceive of them even driving, let alone everything else, all the
Hmm.
things that come with everything else, with relationships and homecoming and prom and girlfriends, boyfriends, and on and on and on, and all the things. And coaches play a role, as such an important role, because they can oftentimes, your kids are not going to tell you everything, because you're the parents, and they either don't want to disappoint you, or you just don't have that, you don't get into certain topics, or kind of like taboo. But the coach is kind of the safe place where the student athlete can have that conversation. And again, parents, you might not want to know all the details, but you want to know that they're there, that they have somebody they can go to, that's a trusted resource, to get into those areas that maybe you really shouldn't be in that area of your kid's life, and that's separation, right? But it's a
Hmm.
trusted adult. And I think that it's hard for understanding. I remember being a freshman high school mom, and hearing one of the senior moms talk to me about her senior son and some of the stuff he was planning for, like, graduation. I was like, oh, like, I was just so
Yep.
like, oh my gosh, like, it's just like a different world, right? I mean, what talking about going into college and what they're doing versus, your little freshman. So I think that's an important piece, that from a mental health standpoint, you can get in there and have heart to heart conversations and be real with them, right? And
Hmm.
that even the parents, it makes you squirm. So they need to have somebody, right? They need to have somebody they can go to.
Right, right, absolutely. And I think a lot of times that parents tend to forget that they were kids once, and they're like, well, you know what, I always hear the phrase, my kid's not going to get away with anything because I did such and such, and I'm going to learn how to recognize. But at the same time, when you try to lock them down and do a lot of those things, the kids, they just rebel, and so it's understanding that they're young adults, they're going to have lives, and finding a way to not shape it, but kind of steer it and help guide as you go along, as I think is a huge thing. And especially a coach being able to have conversations about like drugs and alcohol, and being able to have things like, okay, there's certain parties and things like that going on. It's not uncommon where I've had kids call me in the past, are like, coach, I broke up with my girlfriend, we got in a fight last night at a party, and blah 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 blah. And I'll ask them point blank, like, were you drinking? And my kids know they can trust me, and they're like, yeah, I had a few drinks in me. I'm like, okay, now I know where you're at, and
Hmm.
how to kind of guide this conversation. And
Hmm.
so I'm by no way, shape, or form condoning drinking and things like that with the kids, but
Sure.
it's a reality of,
Yeah.
and so, but the kids trust me enough where if I ask them point blank, they're not trying to hide it, and they're not trying to say this. They know I'm a safe space where they're like, hey, you know, um, I was in this state of mind, or this is what happened, and then I can have a real conversation with them. Obviously, if it's something that's in danger, and I'm supposed to be a first reporter, and obviously I am, but conversations can go in 100 different ways. And if you have a young man in trouble that doesn't know that he can trust somebody or have a real conversation with all of the details out there outside of a lawyer,
Right. Right.
it's all going to stay internalized.
Yeah. And so what happens with that? I mean, what's with the internalization, right?
Yeah, I mean, with the internalization, they clam up. The world is all of a sudden it's against them. They can't talk about their emotions. Then it just blows up. It's a powder keg, and then they start making irrational decisions. They start quitting things, start doing things that they don't want to, or that we used to not like to do or not supposed to do. It just goes into a whole another realm of troubles versus what if we could have just had this conversation, know that it's a safe space for them to be able to communicate and share information, but also as parents, and I think younger people as they get older, a lot of the problems that they have, especially in the mental health area, is that they don't have the right vocabulary, and
Mm.
so if they're trying to say, I'm feeling a certain way. Well, you're having a panic attack, or you're having an anxiety attack, or whatever it might be. If helping them understand some of those things, so that way they can effectively communicate, then they can go ahead and and respond to you in a positive manner.
So where does your faith come in now? Like as a coach, right? So
hmm
you've always been Christian. Now you're Catholic, right? But where does the faith kind of come in with this mental health and coaching piece of that?
I think a big part of it has to come in the play. Number one, just trying to help as many people as you can, and just trying to do the right thing, and just thinking about what are some of the things that other people are doing that maybe I might be lacking in. If I see one of my players, he is more dedicated. He's reading, reading scripture or reading certain things, and going to services, and some of the other things. It's like, what? Why am I not doing that? This kid is,
Mm.
30 years younger than me, and he gets
Mm-hmm.
it, and he's doing something that I'm not. So I think that's a big part of it. But I also think that the kind of the intersection of mental health with faith is just trying to be a better person in general, and be more understanding. I think a big part of it, also, with my own children, my daughter's 9 and going on 10, and you know, until I became Catholic, a big part of me being a parent was just coming down, as being like, hey, my kid is going to act a certain way, they are going to do this, they're going to, well, she gets older, and it's no longer spontaneity, but she's starting to think and try to figure things out. So it's very similar to with high school kids. It's okay, how can I teach a lesson in such a way that number one, it'll stick with them if it's a life lesson, but also number two, how is it something that we can go ahead and make this into a positive type of event that is centered around Christ and around God in their lives, and that's why at our school we do a lot of things in the spring with we're trying to go to mass, as a team. We say a prayer before every game that we play. Every after every practice, each player has to go hug the other one, or give them a hug and dap, and tell each other that they love them. So it's just trying to incorporate kind of the love and the familial aspect of it with mental health, and knowing that somebody cares about you. You have a community, and within the church, but also on your team, knowing somebody, not just your coach, but your entire team, everyone's looking out for you. I think they can give you comfort and give you, if you need a why, that can be one of them.
Yeah, so I mean, you've coached, if you want to put it this way, right? You coach like Christian teams and then the non-secular teams, you put it that way. But I mean,
Sure.
do you see a difference between the teams that pray together, right? And do you see us different and what's the different factor?
Um, I think I think the biggest thing is that it seems like the teams that pray together from that share faith, and it's okay to talk about God, and it's okay to tell each other that they love and things like that. I think that there's a much stronger bond. A lot of times when you're in the non-secular areas, it's if is it a bunch of guys that just like each other really well, and there's just a big group of friends that play well, and that's why they get along, versus some of the other teams where it's, they have certain shared values, regardless if it's sports or, you can always just, always go, default over to faith. But I definitely think that there is definitely a much larger component, um, with the kids that are, praying together and staying together. I mean, look at some of the best athletes out there right now, regardless of high school, even in college and in the pros. I would say probably 8 out of 10 times they're usually people of faith. You
Hmm.
look at the Ohio State national championship rings. If you saw a
Hmm.
picture of that, there's a cross on the inside.
Hmm.
They're having Bible studies. They're praying together on the field. Some of my really good friends that have moved on and played in the pros or as um, or at very very high levels. Usually they're people of faith. And I think kind of goes back to reminds me of a conversation I was having with my wife the other day. My dad's getting ready to get remarried, and she made the comment that his generation, where like the men almost never wore wedding rings. And
Mm,
I made the
right.
comment where it's like, well, in lacrosse world, in my world, it's like, it's that's just what you do. You kind of want one. You always wear it. It's just kind of
Yep.
showing that, so that that you've taken that leap with somebody else. And I think that that's a huge thing for teams in terms of making that commitment, where you show your bond with your marriage, or I'm sorry, with your wedding ring, but being able to tell your teammates that they love them and being able to pray with them and share that bond together.
Yeah, and so I think the other the one piece I wanted to delve into too is it's very important. I think that what you teach then on the field, right, translates, right? And you're at that point where it really goes. So I'm going to tell you a story. You've never heard this one actually. So this is one of my proudest mom moments, right? Because the parents need to pray too. Is kind of where I'm going with this. But so my older son Jackson, he was had a lot of pressure on him his ninth grade year. You would agree, right? And he was
Oh yeah.
playing varsity, so he has all this pressure on him. He's putting the pressure on himself. He's feeling the pressure, and he goes to his first practice and throws up everywhere. And then we take him to the urgent care, whatever. And so I finally outsourced to my husband. He did a horrible job. So I had to take him. I took him, and then the lady said, "Yep, he's got to get his appendix out." Right. And so went to like 2 or 3 urgent care to Ohio Health to someplace else. And the doctor finally comes in and he says, "Yep, it's your appendix. It's got to come out tonight." And Jackson puts his head down, and it's the beginning of his season. And he looks up at me and he says, "Well, God's got a plan." And in that moment, I was like, "Oh my gosh, thank goodness all my parenting has like actually, done this, because this is going to get us through this." And thankfully, we had a wonderful surgeon. And actually, I said to the surgeon, I said, "Oh, this is just like a bread and butter operation, right?" And he looked at me and he said, "No surgery is bread and butter, right? God's got my
Hmm.
hands. I'm putting God into your son." Right? Which like that put me at ease. So I want all surgeons to, to know that. But it gave me a little humility. And then years later, when Jackson had another injury, and you were telling me like you were afraid that he had had appendicitis, and I was like, "We already did that ninth grade. You'd forgotten."
Yep.
But God definitely has a plan on that. But where I'm going with that as well is I don't know how you can play sports at that high level. And I mean, high school is still a high level to play sports. For a kid to start a sport and still play all the way through high school, right, is a big deal, because so many kids follow along the way. But
Hmm.
having said that, I don't know how you can play at that level. And go through injuries that are inevitable, to go through the pressure and everything, and not have the faith, right? Because to me, that's like a safe place you can go in order to help deal with it. So how do you encourage your players to do that? How do you kind of tell them to utilize and go there when necessary?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, is that a lot of the kids, when they run into problems, the kids that the kids that are really really big with the relationship with God. I think the biggest thing is that they understand, okay, yeah, we had a loss today. It's not the end of the world. There's a reason why we're going through this. There's a reason why why this is happening to us. I don't see what the lesson is, but but there's a reason why we're going through this. And typically they recover from like life-changing events or season-changing events much quicker than I think that the kids that don't have a very strong relationship or no relationship with God at all. So I think that the way that we kind of incorporate that is just number one, pray about it. I think, but also number two is just say, you know what, just realize God has a plan. There is a reason why these things happen, and we talk about that. We say, okay, well, this isn't life changing. What's the next path that's given to us, and just trying to figure it out from there. And I think that just there's a lot of comfort in a lot of the kids. It's, especially we see a lot of kids with like we talked about earlier with the recruiting trail, where they're like, you know what, I didn't get into this school over here for lacrosse. This was my dream school. However, I got into this school over here, and you know what? This is the best thing for me, and this is where God wants me. And then a year later,
Mm.
2 years later, like that was the best thing that ever could have happened to me because I am at home.
Oh, so actually helping with the acceptance piece of it, right? And just
Yep,
trusting the process.
exactly. I think that's the best word I was looking for is looking for the acceptance of it.
Oh, that's a beautiful, I mean, yes, because then you can stay even keel and not, be kind of all over the place and with your emotions and whatnot. So I mean, kind of back to again, I think what parents also want to know, which is, what can they do? Right. So you've seen a lot of kids, you've done a lot of stuff, you've seen them go off and play college, et cetera. What can they do? What can the parents do? Or what should their students be doing, student athletes be doing in those upper grade levels, in that 10th to 11th transition? Right, and it's really 10th and 11th because by senior year,
Yeah, they're yeah, it's
you're kind of done.
they know
I
they know
think
what's going
that's
on.
a shock, actually. Maybe we should just say that. Senior year is too late, right? You should have already gotten all your SATs and ACTs. Like that's already like your body of work is set by that point. You
Hmm.
don't have too much runtime to fix anything, right? So what should they be focused in on during those years to be the strongest candidate for college? Forget it, even the sport part, just college as a whole to get there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is understanding time management. Number one, being self sufficient in that regard. Not having to be told, "Hey, it's time to do math. It's time to get up and do your homework. It's time to do this." Having a schedule, having a routine, I think that is a lot. But I also think that scheduling time to just be a kid again or just be a family again, I think that is absolutely huge because so many people get caught up in the day to day routines where we got to get this done, we got to get this, we got to get this. Well, did you block out, 2 hours on Sunday morning to go to church and go to dinner or go to breakfast
Mhm.
brunch or do something together? So I think scheduling time and being able to be self sufficient and follow your own schedule, I think is huge, especially at that young age. And that's the biggest thing with a lot of athletes find out when they go on to the next level is the time commitment. But those kids who understand time schedules and everything else like that, they're able to transition much easier because they schedule their social time, they schedule their alone time, they
Mm,
schedule their all of those things, and they're
good
used
point.
to that.
Yeah, right. That's a great point. Okay,
Yeah.
what else?
I think that another thing is understanding that there's two sides to every story, and what I mean by that, it's not a he said she said type of thing, but what I mean is a lot of times you know a, a parent will only see a kid from their angle. So talk to their coaches, talk to their teachers, and on the flip side of that, the parent, or I'm sorry, the coach only sees their player that they see on the field and not what the parent sees at home. So what I mean by two sides to every story, it's there's two sides to every single kid that's out there, right? And so if a parent is able to communicate with me or I can communicate with them and we have an open dialogue, we see what's going on at home and we see what's going on the field, and we can see that it's consistent. If something is
Mhm.
off there, we got a problem with that kid or with that young man. So being able to have and understand there's some dialogue that needs to come back and forth. You know, I had a player one time where he was coming through, and the kid has I don't know what it is, but he has this syndrome where he can't look people in the eye, but he's listening, and as he's talking to you, he'll be looking over to the side, but he's getting everything. And his dad let me know that this was a legitimate thing going on with him and sat him down to practice where he'd have to sit there and talk to you and whatnot. And when I told the other coaches, they were like, well, I thought he was just disrespecting me and he wasn't paying attention and blah blah
Wow.
blah blah blah.
Right.
you know that's a huge thing. Or being able to communicate to coaches that what, my son has a learning disability or he has ADHD or certain things where I do that with my players all the time where they're parents, and I say, hey, if your kid learns in a certain way or they need a certain type of learning, let me know because it's our job to facilitate that. And so being able to have that the two sides to every story, I guess the kid would be the story, and just being able to have that dialogue between the parents and the coaches, I think would be absolutely huge. And that's one of the things that they can do when they're young as freshmen, develop that rapport and that relationship, so that way once they go through that turmoil of between the sophomore and junior years, you're ready for it and you have that trust relationship built up and that dialogue as well as that rapport built in there.
So what about, so that makes total sense, but what about from the standpoint of what would be things that parents do that you're like cringing, like the cringy stuff that you wish you could tell parents, don't do that. Like you're not helping your kid. Because I think sometimes that would be helpful to hear from coaches too.
Yeah. I think some of the things that I see a lot of parents do is they start to they start to diagnose a game right when it's done, and a kid's in a highly emotional state. They try to cast blame sometimes on why did what happened, Johnny over there on, he didn't do well or whatever. Sometimes take 24 hours, in that car ride home. Sometimes it's okay to be silent, and if you have to talk, just like, hey, how do you think you did, or just give me your, something that's an opinion. Don't talk about X's and O's. I think that's one thing. But the other thing is a lot of times parents are going to have to understand that there's disappointment in life. Not everything's going to go their way or the way that they want for their kids. So if their kid's not getting a lot of playing time, have their son or daughter go in and say, hey, why am I not getting playing time? Or talk about certain things. And contacting the coach is, I don't want to say is a last resort, but just do something like, hey, just a heads up, Johnny's disappointed with his playing time. He's going to be talking to you today, to talking to you about it.
Mm.
Just a heads up. I'm not saying
Not
one way or
actually
the
having the
other, but
conversation.
but just
Right.
just realize that conversation is coming. I just wanted to give you, like, that gives me a world of weight off my shoulders, because when a kid comes up and says, hey, why am I not getting playing time, as a coach, I'm kind of put on the spot, and it's like, okay, there's a lot of data I need to pull in. There's other things that, whatnot. I got to
Yeah.
get my thoughts together. Whereas if that parent gives that coach, heads up, hey, Johnny's coming, or Sarah's coming to talk to you about this, that gives us time to prepare for it and be like, okay, let me go ahead and give it a meaningful response.
Well, I mean, what do you say too, or how do you, I guess, teach this and or coach it, that resiliency there? Because there are disappointments to your point, right? Like they might not make varsity, or there's, I don't know, you get stuck behind playing, some kid that's in that spot for forever and you don't get the playing time, you don't get the opportunity. So what are coaching tips there for either for the player or for the parent?
Yeah, I think that for the player and the parent, for the parent standpoint, just be supportive of the kid, but also talk to the coach and be like, okay, you know what, he's talked to you and he said that you said, these three things he needs to do. How can we help him at home do those things? You said ground ball, you said communication, you said, your shooting needs to be better, your movement, your cutting needs to be better. How can we help him at home facilitate some of these things? So I think that's a big part of it. I think that also, taking some of that criticism and the fact that you're not playing, don't take it personally. Like, take it as a cue where it's like, you know what, maybe I'm not the best defenseman. Maybe I can help out over here. Maybe this is, I'm a better role over here. Because a lot of times, and I'm included, I'm guilty of this, where if I know a player might be better in a different situation, but he loves playing goalie, for example, he loves it, but he's a terrible goalie. A lot of times be like, you know what, you run like a deer. I think you could do better at source D mid. A lot of times coaches might be hesitant to have the conversation, but be open, be like, hey, coach, you know what? If I'm not getting PT over here, what do you think about me switching over here? You know what? Yeah, let's try that. I've actually seen kids excel like that. So being open to different positions, as well as just being thankful to be part of the team. When I was at
Mhm.
Ohio State, there were a lot of guys where they were like, you know what, this is a bunch of crap. I'm not getting playing time. I'm not doing this. This isn't fair. And I'm just sitting there. I just looked at my locker every day. I walked through and I saw that block O, and I went to my locker. I was just grateful to be in that locker room and just happy I was there. I didn't care. So I think, being part of that team, and having some of that resiliency comes to, just, I think, being grateful for what you got.
Yeah, that's that is a lot of grace on that one because it's hard to practice. But yes, you're right. You're right. Practicing that gratitude is very, and and I think also from the parent part, it's hard to have that. It's a good thing to practice as well because those years when you get to see your kid out there playing are so incredibly special, and you just don't know how long you're ever going to have, right? So each one should
Hmm.
be like a gift, and you don't want to take advantage of it. But it's I think that it's easier said than done, but we
Right. Absolutely.
we could all
My son,
strive.
my,
We could all
I
strive
mean,
for that.
yeah, my son is starting to play little league baseball. I know it's a sin because I'm a lacrosse coach and he's playing baseball, but it's one of those things where I'm starting to teach my wife about it where she's like, Jack, you need to do this. You need to do this. I'm like, you're coaching from the sidelines. Don't do that.
Yeah,
And it's that thing where it's like, you want to get out there and you want to hit the ball for him. You want to catch or do some of those
yeah.
things. And it's just realizing, he's on his own journey and trust him and let him do his thing.
It is a journey. It is a journey. I'll tell you, and here's my parenting tip for you. Just if you ever need to figure out how to let go and get that separation, you put any of your, girl or boy into wrestling, and I think you learn the fastest because that is the most intense 1 minute round, right, ever. And your heart as a parent is like pounding out of your chest, but there's nothing you can do. You have no control whatsoever about whatever's happening on that wrestling mat, and you learn very quickly it's all on them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's crazy, and that's the one thing I'm not looking forward to is just what are the changes that are going to come with them? What are the sports are they going to dovetail into? And
Yep.
so
Yeah, and a little comeuppance for you because you're like, "Oh, no."
right.
It's just inevitable. It's inevitable. Well, with that, I mean, I just want to really kind of just sum up with, what do you say about just, again, back to faith and kind of what's your prayer practice? Do you pray over your team? Like, what do you do when you're getting game ready, right? You're doing that, you're coaching. How do you bring that piece of it to you?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is number one, me personally, I say a prayer before every game, before I even walk into the school, and just to be number one, be as the best version of myself as I can during a game. Number one, number two, over the safety of my players. But then also number three is just hopefully that they're able to take a lot of the things that we've taught them and apply them in that game setting. From a team standpoint, I think the biggest thing that we do from a faith standpoint is just really it's what we do every day is we tell each other that we love each other and that we're there for each other, and that in those times where when things aren't down, and we tell them look left, look right, those are the guys that are going to be able to help you out, and look to that brotherhood and that fellowship that you guys have. And in playoff time, when we always, we'll go to mass in preparation for the game, and sometimes we'll have priests come over and pray with us and things like that. But I think that just being that tight knit group, I think is the biggest thing for us, and just knowing that they love each other.
Yeah, I think that's and I'll be a testament to that because it's incredible how long that stays too. I've been able to see that bond and how long that's a lifetime bond. That bond that you've been able to have that culture in the boys and have them feel that and the stuff that they've gone through together. Of course, they've gone through life together, right? So they've
Hmm.
seen teammates, dads dies. They've seen all, they've gone to funerals together. They've gone to everything together, and it's incredible. And I mean, just a testament is like my younger son, we had a transfer in there. Those two are like in fist fights to begin with. And then years later, they're 2 years in college and they're best friends. They're like one of the greatest friends. So it's amazing what being able to say that all the time, even to a bunch of boys who are maybe not always the most emotive, can do about loving each other and being that brotherhood, like really practicing the brotherhood. It's been something exceptional. It's probably the best. It's probably of all your accolades, it's probably the one you should probably hang your hat on.
Yeah, no, I mean
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing. I remember when Blake was, I think it was in 2019 when we were in the North Carolina trip, and they were walking around playing pool in the corner of the little motel, and I tried to crack a joke to him. He was just stone faced. I'm like, I'm gonna break this kid by the time he gets to. I'm gonna have him giving hugs. I'm gonna break through that wall by the time he graduates. And you know what?
Yep.
And every time he comes back for a game and he gives me a big hug and says, "Love you, coach," that's the best feeling ever. Is just to know that he
That's a
was a part
tough
of it.
nut to crack, and you did it. It's
Oh my
so true.
gosh, I love that
That
one.
is so
Such a
true.
witty
That
kid.
is so true. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for all your work. And we'd love to have you, talk again. And thanks again for everything you're doing and keeping up the faith.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to help.
Thanks, Coach. Take
Yep.
care. God
Take care.
bless.
Hmm.